So for this tutorial, we're going to take a look at using the granular synth function in Alchemy in Logic. So I'm going to give you guys a quick rundown of how I used granular synthesis to create the portal opening sound in this sound design piece. Granular synthesis involves slicing a piece of audio into tiny little grains. Now, a grain of audio is defined as a piece of audio between 10 milliseconds and 100 milliseconds in length. So we're talking about really tiny pieces of sound. So to visualize it, let's take a look at this piece of audio down here. And if we zoom in really far on the waveform, we could manually make these slices. So a granular synth takes these slices and rearranges them in a new order to create some unique sounds. So we could do this process manually by slicing our own grains and rearranging them, but if you were to do that, it's important to note that we need to put a fade at the beginning and a fade at the end of each grain of audio to avoid clipping when they're playing back against each other. So to get that sound, I used a sample of someone opening up a bottle of fizzy drink, and I loaded that into Alchemy and used the granular synth settings on it to manipulate it and stretch it out. So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to want to create a new software instrument track. So we're going to go to track and new software instrument track, and we're going to want to go down and we're going to want to load up Alchemy. So Alchemy is automatically going to load a preset, so we want a blank slate. So we're going to go up to the top right hand corner and click File and Clear. So this is going to give us a blank slate. Now in Alchemy we have three different panels. So we have Browse to look at all of our presets, we have Simple, and we have Advanced. So for this we want to use the Advanced panel. So in our Advanced panel we have our Sources section, so where we find our oscillators. So we have Source A selected, so we're going to want to import our audio file into Source A. So we're going to click on Source A and we're going to press Import Audio. So once we click on Import Audio, it's going to bring up this screen right here. So on the left hand side is where we can find all of our folders and different places on our computer to find our samples. If you're struggling to find samples to use, you could use some of Alchemy's pre-made samples, and there's lots of samples from the EXS sampler in Logic as well. But for this, I used this sample down here, which sounds like someone opening up a bottle of fizzy drink. So once we find a sample that we want to use, this next bit is important. So down on the bottom left hand corner we have our different synth modes. So for this we want to make sure that granular is selected, because if we don't, then it's just going to not show you any of the granular functions on the synth. So once we have granular selected and we found a sample to use, we're going to go down and we're going to click Import. So now our sample should be loaded into Alchemy and we should be able to play it back on our keyboards. So we've loaded our sample into source number A. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to switch from our global tab, which lets us see all of our sources together, to the source A tab. So in the middle we can see our waveform that we've just loaded in, and on the left here we can do a few things. like change the position of or where the sample starts playing from. So if you just wanted to use granular synthesis on a small portion of the sample, we'd move our position marker. Next to that we have the speed knob, so we could change the playback speed. We can speed it up or slow it down. On the right hand side is where we can find our granular settings. So up at the top we have our volume, which just changes the volume of the sample that we have loaded in. We have our size knob, which changes the length of our audio grains. So like I mentioned earlier, an audio grain is usually between 10 milliseconds and 100 milliseconds, but Alchemy lets you go up to 230 milliseconds. The next one is density. So the density knob lets us choose the amount of grains that we use from our sample. So in Alchemy, the maximum amount of grains it lets you use is 10. You might find some other synthesizers that have granular settings might let you use more, but usually the less grains that we use, the lower the quality of your sound sample is going to be. So that's our sound sample with 10 grains, and if we bring that down to 1 grain, you're going to get a bit more of a stuttery sound. So if we just reduce the speed maybe of the sample, you can really hear that stutter. The more grains that you add, the smoother it's going to be. So these are the basic granular settings up here, but don't forget that there's loads more that you can mess around with to get some different sounds. Like we've just been playing around with the speed. We could change the pitch. We can use our filters, and we have our envelopes down here as well. So there's lots to play around with to get all sorts of different kind of sounds.